Today, I'd like to introduce Ripley. This is the first time that we've had a photographer talking about their work. Throughout my time as chairman of the executive committee, there's been many a debate about photography and its role in sporting art. When we revised our collecting policy, as we moved on to our new site in Palace House, we deliberately included photography as a subgroup of images that we should collect. Many of you will know that we've included photographic archive of Frank and Jim Meads to the collection, and that we are continuing to record and conserve all those photographic images. Frank and Jim were recording the day-to-day events of country life. The archive provides us an invaluable record of those days from the 1930s to the 21st century. Today, we'll learn something totally different from the photographic world. Ripley is a fine art photographer concentrating on equine subjects. He will tell us how he entered this world, and how he produces such fine images. This talk coincides with an exhibition of his work at the National Horseracing Museum in Newmarket. The exhibition is entitled The Household Cavalry, the Coronation Year Exhibitions. The set of 12 photographs has been produced to celebrate the coronation of Charles III. As usual, Ripley is happy to answer questions at the end of the talk. The procedure is that you use the Q&A button to the bottom right of your screen. You type in the questions, I put the questions to Ripley, but I will be asking questions as we go through. So, without any more ado, over to you, Ripley.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you for having me on the webinar. It's very kind of you. I think Tim initially wanted to sort of ask how I started my world of photography. And this started when I was quite young. I was about 11, 12 years old. And I'd always expected to be a musician. My mother was an actress and my father a musician. And photography is one of those things which I discovered myself, really, and I became very passionate about. I had an older sister who came back from America with an SLR camera. You could take the lens off and everything. I just loved the whole technology of it. I was already sort of creating images at a young age with little inexpensive cameras, but also I loved drawing and painting, so I was very sort of visually aware. And my parents, through their sort of artistic connections and musicians and actresses and everything else, I had lots of sort of inspiration around me all the time. So that was great. And also when I was younger, my folks, as part of a conservation of small large cats in captivity, an organisation called the Cat Survival Trust, they kept large cats. I don't mean sort of lions and tigers, but more like bobcats, servals, ocelots, caracal lynxes and lynx and stuff like that. And it was all about keeping bloodlines pure in captivity. And my parents got involved. They had a little bit of land, built some enclosures on their property, and they basically were foster parents. They weren't involved, obviously, in the genetics, but they were foster parents of these little cats who would arrive at kittens and then go back into the breeding program when they were about a year old. So, as well as sort of all the interesting musicians and everything, I had this road into a very, very unusual type of animal, which I think gave me a lot of understanding and insight, because they weren't to be humanized. You had to, if I photographed them in an enclosure, you know, it'd take you an hour just sitting in a corner, being very still and very patient, in order for them to realize that you weren't a threat in that environment, and to, you know, to go about, albeit in captivity, a more natural behavior, which I then photographed. So it gave me a lot of respect and patience with animals growing up, and all the rest of it. So cut forward a few years, I did do music for a while, because I found it helped pay for my photographic equipment and early photographic film processing and everything, which was all very expensive when you're a young chap. So I ended up touring in bands as a musician. These were rock bands from a sort of age of 17 till 21. And it was all over the world. So I was very lucky, fortunate, and that helped my photography a lot, doing lots of different bits of wildlife here and there, and obviously lots of other musicians and things like that. So when I was 22, I moved straight to London. I didn't say my folks were, I was brought up in Manchester, just outside Manchester. So that's where I originally started. So I moved straight to London, and I got chatting to a person there who said I should show my work to a large photographic library. And literally, they loved all the work I'd done, thankfully, because I was extremely concerned about showing anybody pictures I'd done so far at that point. And literally the next week, I was photographing David Bowie, I think, at Wembley Stadium, and Tina Turner, and it's sort of all crazy, all to do with musicians. And that's where I'm just going to quickly give you a very brief overview and some pictures of the techniques I ended up using, which when you look at my work, you'll think it's all very diverse, but in reality, I'm just doing the same technique which I've honed down over the years. So if I just exit this, hopefully this will all work. And I just whiz to the top here. So when I started doing bands, hold on, will that go? Play that, hold on. So yeah, so when I started doing musicians, I started doing the street photography around the all over the world. Again, I was shooting for magazines like Q magazine, Rolling Stone magazine, Spin, other sort of niche magazines, and it was all a mixture of live work, like this Paul Weller, Radiohead. I did lots of stuff with. Again, all over the world on tour. You know, it'd be Australia, Japan. I would do all the this is Prodigy in Australia. All this sort of imagery with rock bands, very much sort of street, just go out, find a location and try and just do something quite artistic with it. I soon became a bit, not bored with that, but I just got obsessed with large format film and detail. So I became more obsessed with studio photography and using 6:7 film or 5:4 film and having it drum scanned and put into the computer. And then you know, this was early 90s, so Photoshop had just come out, and this was the sort of thing I was doing, just playing around with early Photoshop. Now here's an example, sort of probably about 96, of the band Pulp, put into a CGI space. Again, at that point in time, I was just photographing the band in a studio, just sat on white boxes, and with the idea that they'd be put into an environment afterwards. So this gives you an idea of just an unreal space composited in the computer afterwards. And it just here's me experimenting, just trying different things. Very early shoots with Destiny's Child and Beyonce. Again, little things like this picture, which looks very simple. The actual backplate was actually on a rooftop in Shoreditch, but I then decided to put, which you can't quite see, I don't think, with all the stuff on the top of the screen, but I put a background of Chicago in there for some reason. I don't know why. But again, it gives you this sort of idea. All right, that cut forward to doing lots of stuff with Victoria Beckham when she left the Spice Girls. Again, this is quite a surreal image at the time. With all CGI architecture, real backplates and different skies. And at that time, I was doing quite a lot of work in New York and LA, but primarily New York. And I worked with a CGI house who rendered lots of buildings and bits and pieces. So I had a lot of help and people at my disposal, sort of making some of these images come to reality, even though I was doing a lot of post-production myself as well. This led to doing lots of stuff with David Beckham. So I did lots of David Beckham. He was going to bring out a clothing range, DB, which never came to light, but I did lots of shoot for it. And you can see when the date this was. This was probably about 2001, and I'm just seeing a complete lack of tattoos going on. So
no tattoos there.
Give you a good idea of the date of that. So this was, yeah, I think it was about 2000, 2001. And this was all for big Adidas campaigns. It was all billboard campaigns and advertising all over the world. Did stuff for FIFA and all the rest of it. Change of haircut and style. So this was probably did about four large campaigns with David Beckham and must have done several shoots at with Victoria, and then I started doing stuff like this sort of fashions work as well. This is a very complex image. Girls shot in England in a studio, and all their reflections, they would be standing on perspex mirrors and everything else. So, and the back plate I'd shot in New York in the meatpacking district. All the glass panels there are all CGI, and they're all reflecting what they would really reflect. So as well as shooting the space you're looking at, you're shooting at the reflections that would be there if this imaginary glass appeared. So you end up sort of in quite complex environments. And here's a bit more fanciful, very not the real world, with them doing a sort of catwalk upside of a skyscraper on Fifth Ave. So so it gives you an idea of the sort of where my mind and what I was playing with. These sort of putting people from a studio environment into quite complex CGI or real world alternate environments. And again, you know, just having the freedom to just use your imagination. And this does relate to the equine world, because Munnings started out doing advertising work. So you can see how it's all just forming a technique over time, and a visual of seeing things from a different point of view. All this sort of CGI stuff led to, at the same time I was doing lots of work in Formula One. I sort of, the musicians I'd sort of been there, done that, and I was trying to, once I'd got sort of higher end advertising and other bits and pieces, I felt I could bestow the Formula One world with some cooler imagery than they were currently having. So I ended up getting in touch with an editorial called F1 Racing, and I ended up in their covers for about 4 years. Did lots of private shoots with, with Michael Schumacher. Lots of work with Ferrari at that point in time. Would be in Maranello every sort of few months, or whatever. With Giancarlo Fisichella, naturally. And these sort of images with all the F1, again, if on the website, there's a little thing on, I think it's the bottom of the first page where it says view history. There's a whole thing about the work I did in F1, and there's an interview I did with ITV at the time. So yeah, no, it's all interesting, sort of how that worked and how that formed, and ended up working with lots of the teams direct. So anyway, that led to other big advertising, because it's amazing how many people from not within my genre saw what I was doing, and they wanted me to bestow that sort of imagery onto their product or genre or whatever. So I mean, that led to big campaigns with BAT. So these were huge global billboard campaigns, which I ended up doing just back in, I think, 2003-4 now. Again, because they'd seen all those elements with CGI and computers. Out of this, it led to being contacted through a guy who used to work with Bernie Ecclestone on his magazine, Formula One. It led to being approached to doing lots of work with automotive, which I'd never even thought of. But again, to me, it was just a product. So I ended up with in very large studios, huge code studios, massive floating ceilings, huge lighting rigs, doing a lot of automotive work. I was lucky enough to work with great manufacturers with sexy looking cars. So Aston Martin, I did a lot of work with, and Mercedes, Bentley, Lamborghini, Ferrari. And this was, again, when you think about it, what I'm doing with equine now with the horses is photographing them often in a yard, either training yard or a stud, usually a very quiet time of day, just me and the handler maybe, and just try and keep it as relaxed and calm as possible, so I can get the picture I want and hopefully move the horse around so the light is on his body. So it's and then I end up taking the horse out of that environment and then constructing another environment around with grass and other architectural features, maybe from the stud yard or training yard or whatever. No different from me photographing the car in a studio, really, and then putting it into a different environment. Like these 3 cars were all shot in different spaces and then all put together to make it look like they were coherently there at the same time, which they weren't, because they were all rival manufacturers, so they didn't want to let the other manufacturer know how their car looked for the next season. So all these sort of little things were giving me lots of spatial awareness and you know, how to construct things in the computer environment after I'd captured everything at extremely high res on film. So again, it's sort of you know, giving a very high-end polished look to in the automotive world. Not dissimilar for me when I was back in the day doing musicians and bands in the studio, putting in different environments. I was just doing cars. It's a bigger setup, it's a bigger environment, bigger production, but all the same sort of thing. So cut to, we're getting there, 2011. Oops, I put a bit too many cards in here, but you get an idea. In fact, this is an interesting one. This is me sort of winding down on some of the car work where I'd moved from London because I wasn't reliant on the photographic processing labs anymore, because I went to very high resolution and I was working with Hasselblad and doing various sort of seminars and studio events for them. And they'd asked me to do, well, they chose me to do their first edition of the first book, just featuring 12 photographers worldwide. They're very generous in choosing me to be one of those. And I shot this car, Bentley matte white, Essex white as I like to call it, Mulliner GT. But if you look on the back, if you notice that, if you're Suffolk, that's actually the Ark in Bury St Edmunds. And then the actual backplate going beyond that is the docks at Felixstowe, but all put into an environment to make a more sort of surreal one. Oh, here's another car, Jeff Koons, designed BMW. So, you know, I'm going to quickly whiz through these because I put quite a lot on there. So you get the idea, sort of the high-end sort of look to that sort of work. So, and then we end up with Jag at the end. And this is quite an interesting little one. Again, it's just different backgrounds you're going to see with the same car shoot, but all done at extremely high resolutions. So, right, I shall move on to horses, but we just skipped past a couple of images of this girl with the flag, but we'll get back to that shortly. So it was about 2011. I sort of wanted to take a break from doing commercial works and become, in quotes, an artiste and just do stuff for myself. And I thought I would love to do something with animals again. And I'd love to do something with horses. Having not been from an equine background whatsoever, I knew nothing about horses. So, but I just knew I had just this idea of using my techniques in the equine world and seeing what I could bring to it. And I remembered, excuse me one moment, I remembered that an assistant I'd employed back in the day, probably when all the Beckham thing was going on in about 2000 to 2003, his sister had a number of horses in training. And I thought, well, that's a really good contact, because I knew the work I was going to put in the images, so it couldn't just be, you know, the mate's horse down the road or something. It had to look good and be a good thoroughbred. So I got in touch with her, and she not only kindly saw the vision I had and allowed me to experiment with her horses, who at the time, National Hunt horses, were in training with Paul Nichols. She also did lovely things like enroll me in a 42 lecture course at the National Stud, so I could learn everything there was to know about not only the anatomy of the horse, how they should be stood, look, presented, but also the whole breeding cycle, nutrition, the whole business and everything else. So that was hugely insightful, and it really inspired me. In fact, it wasn't even that. As well as that, I should say, it was also, I read huge amounts about the history of horse portraiture, histories of you know, George Stubbs and Frederick Herring and Munnings and all the rest of so I just got obsessed with that whole look of imagery. But I was tailing off, if you imagine, from doing cars and these other sort of stuff with more modern architecture around. And I was out in New York, actually for a meet and greet with some clients out there. And I'd already done a few little portraits of some of the horses. And I thought, I know, I could put it in a modern context, like put it in the center of Times Square or something. Having shot in New York many times, it does require lots of permits to shoot there. And I was walking about the streets of New York with my tripod and rather large Hasselblad camera, and thinking, oh God, they're going to stop me. As soon as I put the tripod down, they're going to stop me for shooting, and I need to produce permits. And anyway, I walked up to Times Square, and they closed the whole of Times Square off for the launch of, I think it was the Microsoft Surface tablet at the time, and could see all the streets, and it just had signs up saying photographers may be working in this area. So so it was almost one of those, just fate stepped in, and I just photographed every single street I could around Times Square, and I ended up with this image you'll see before you now, and this does all link to the Household Cavalry, because when I was doing this imagery, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and I had an idea to do some portraits of a girl with just the American flag, and I wanted her sort of overlooking New York. And I don't know why, just another idea I had, and I just thought I'd experiment with it. And this ended up to this image here, which I ended up doing. But whilst I was on top of these rooftops overlooking New York, I certainly had this, don't think I'm insane, this crazy idea of horses being on rooftops. Sounds odd, but I thought I could do something with it as a sort of art project, which would look really different. And anyway, so this was another shot of the girl on Rodeo Drive, bit naughty, but there you go. And so anyway, I came back to England, and I said to my friend, I had this idea of some horses on tops of rooftops. What do you think? And I think the consensus was that the thoroughbred industry just wouldn't wrap their head around that. It would be too abstract. They wouldn't get it, and just put it on the back burner type thing. So which I did, and I fully got that. And I was producing more images like this one. And again, if you look at an image like this, the horse, National Hunt horse, this is made up of many separate images. The main background plate there, or the vista, is the gallops at Poor Nichols, down Ditchit. The tree is from the garden here. The foreground is from the riverbank at, I think it's Anglesey Abbey, and then the sky. I think I did all those sky views over the sea in Miami. So it's a very constructed image. And when I do put all these elements together, it's not just like I'm using, say, a background plate, a foreground plate, and the subject. The actual scenes are often shot many pictures wide and then many layers deep. So there's always shifts of focus through the image as well. So it actually ends up, a picture like this may actually be 20 to 30 separate, extremely high resolution images all put together. So there's nothing out of focus from the very foreground to the very background, and you can print it hugely. If it could go hugely, you'd still see every tiny little vein, tiny detail of fur in the hoof, every little eye. Everything is precise, and every blade of grass. So it's and there's lots of hand-drawn elements as well, because no matter how high resolution you shoot at, a fine detail of hair on manes and tails and everywhere else, and ear hair and all the hock and everything, and even lots of grass when you're blending layers together to do shifts of focus. Ends up huge amounts of hand-drawn elements as well. So each picture usually takes between 6 to 8 weeks to construct. Now this is an image which we'll get back to, but this is from this horse over on Kubar Edge, overlooking the Derbyshire plains, I suppose you'd call it, landscape. Just off to your far left there would be Chatsworth House, and this is again a sort of me just experimenting with bits and pieces. This is Galileo Gold, which I did for Goodwood, and that was used, I think, as a big billboard thing for them. I did a couple of yearly campaigns for them, and again, that background isn't quite the reality. The views shot from the top of the stadium, but the actual track and the valley behind, if you're used to that area, have all been sort of merged together and brought close together. So you've got more for everything in the same picture. And then, you know, I wasn't going to just, even though if you look at the website, there's stuff with like the Gurkha and Cracksman and lovely horses like that, which are more done in a typical stud or more echoing to the old master painters. I didn't want to sort of fall into the trap of just trying to replicate any sort of old masters in any way whatsoever. And so I would still use like California chrome here. I still would like to go off, and went off on a tangent and did in front of the sort of biggest chromiest thing I could find in California, which was the Disney Concert Hall in LA, designed by Frank Gehry. So which was again fun image. I think he's behind me here, that you can see. So that was all really good. And through various, when you think I only started photographing or constructing the equine images back in 2011, 12, really 2012. 2014, I had my first solo exhibition at the Jockey Club Rooms. They were very kind enough to put it on there. And then I was approached in 2016 by John Warren to do a portrait of Estimate for the Queen. The Queen had seen a little brochure I'd done previously, rather cheekily inviting her to the Jockey Club Rooms. She came back, wrote a beautiful letter saying she was a little bit busy, but it was all good. And actually, that's the funny story with John Warren, because he'd been trying to get in touch with me for a while, but I've been so snowed under with sort of in my own madness constructing, I can't remember the picture I was working on at the time, that I'd sort of not ignored his calls, but I hadn't done it as a priority. And then I got a call at Goodwood, and he said, "Are you at Goodwood at the minute?" And I said, "Yes, I am. I think I just put a picture up in the Curate Lounge," and he said, "Would you mind meeting me downstairs by the Horse's Head down there?" And I did, and he said, "Would you like to do a picture for the Queen?" And of course I said, "Of course I would. It'd be an absolute honour. How amazing!" And then obviously he told me his name, and I was there googling his name, going, "Oh, blimey, John Warren." But that was fantastic, and everyone there was amazing. So that led to that. But before any of this had happened, this idea I'd had in New York about horses being on rooftops was still going on. And by about 2015, I thought I could do something with the Household Cavalry, protectors, overlooking London, trusted guardians. And to me, and in my mind, I could just see it working. And I thought this would make sense. And so even before Estimate, I formulated this idea. And actually, at the end of 2015, I'd on my sort of tail end of, shows how everything's connected, tail end of sort of doing the commercial works. I'd done a lot of work with Aston Martin. They were very generous, and they'd always invite me to various do's at the Park Lane showroom. And I was there for this sort of little gallery of this chap who'd done lovely illustrations of the cars. And I was there chatting with another one of the attendees who really liked my thoroughbred works. And she asked me what my next project was, or what I was working on. I said, I just had this idea to do something with the Household Cavalry on their horses, on top of buildings, but I had no idea how I would get that going. And she said, "Well, I know the former commanding officer of the Household Cavalry. I'll send him an email." So again, one of those things, it's all connected with, you know, that if I hadn't done the stuff with cars, I'd have probably never met the lady and she would have never made the introduction. So it's just how life works. And so yes, started an email conversation, ended up getting in touch with the new commanding officer, who was Colonel James Gaisley. And I went and met him at Hyde Park Barracks, and he kindly just thought it was a great idea. He could see it straight away, and yes, you know, we just started the conversation about how we would go about photographing the horses and the soldiers, and how we could bring it all together. So you have to skip forward a couple of years. So back in 2016, 2017. 2016, I started doing this picture, leopard spotted horse with Dalmatians in the landscape. Again, just I had this idea, a bit like the cavalry thing, so I just had this idea of a picture, and then tried to form that into the real world. So again, that was a case of locating a horse, one of only two in the country at that point in time, two studs, I think it was. And then all the Dalmatians, and constructing that image, which took rather a long time. But I do look back and think I was bonkers to attempt it, because it is about, it's like that. That is like doing 23 separate large horse portraits, because each dog is given as much attention as the main subject. Background plate is actually Chatsworth again. Chatsworth House is just behind the belly of the horse, and the other picture I took in the landscape was actually from the cliff top, very far distance behind. So it's all connected purely without me realizing, because they've been done a few years apart, and I didn't even realize I was sort of in the same locale. But that's where we are with that one. And this is the proposal after all this I originally sent to the Household Cavalry, which shows my picture at the bottom there, which is racehorse in an English landscape. And I just said to James Gaisley, I said, if you imagine that horse with a soldier on top in the ceremonial outfits, and the countryside background plate being the City of London, and then I showed him the back plates of James Bond overlooking the old war office in the MOD building. I just said, imagine him on a horse. And so that was my sort of initial sort of pitch, I suppose you say, because this was all done on spec. It wasn't commissioned. It was just me having an idea in my mind that I think I can do something good here. So anyway, they kindly agreed to the shoot, and in July 2017, I did the initial shoot at Hyde Park Barracks, and that was, you know, a very long day, very intense day, with all the, you know, basically they're putting on a private ceremony just for me. So a lot of clothing coming out of the cold rooms and storage, all the horses being groomed, and you know, farriers and everything. And then what I did with that was I set up my camera in the middle of Hyde Park courtyard, and I had the horses walk around in a big semicircle, U-shape, I suppose you call it. And so I could get the light on them from as many angles as possible, because I hadn't photographed the background plates. I was trying to give myself enough options, not knowing quite the views I was going to get, but I was trying to get myself enough options so that one of the images would work with a certain background plate, because everything, obviously, the angle of light and direction of light all has to be cohesive. Moving forward, these are just some little background bits you've got at the barracks. So these are the horses at Hyde Park, or Knightsbridge Barracks, some people prefer to call. And it just gives you a little insight into the background there. There's one of the drum horses there, and again with the picture of the horse which overlooks the Tate, getting it clean up, and then all the helmets and ceremonial clothing. So just a few little bits and pieces. This is a for those who don't know, this is what Hyde Park Barracks courtyard looks like. This wasn't done at the time. This was actually done at one of the rehearsals for the coronation this year, but it gives you an idea of the sort of courtyard and the space. And this will give you an idea of the sort of what I met with when I had these ideas. I think, right, I need to be on elevated rooftops around London. How am I going to construct these pictures, and how am I going to form these ideas into the real world? I can't sit down at a piece of paper or canvas and with a few reference drawings or light drawings, then come up with a complete picture. I have to go out into the real world and capture that at the resolution that I want to, which is extremely high, and make it a cohesive picture. But there's no element I can't capture for real. Especially using, obviously I'm not using CGI. It's real composite imagery. So and you'll notice here, so this is from the rooftop of a building next to Four Seasons in Trinity Square, and looking down at the Tower of London, Tower Bridge, and beyond with the modern architecture of City Hall and the shards off to our right there. And but obviously there's no foreground structure with which you could put a horse on in any way, shape, or form. And sometimes when I'm constructing these pictures, which may be a panorama, it may not be, but say it's something which is quite widescreen, suppose you look, the shape of the pictures I do just tend to form themselves from what I've ended up constructing. I'm not working to a set format or size of finished picture, or uniformity in that size. So obviously here I'm thinking, well, actually, if I put a subject in the foreground on top of a roof structure, that might not work because it would end up having to be such a wide structure. So for this instance, I ended up, oh yeah, well, that's actually a moving picture, I didn't realize that. Here's some more different lighting coming from the left. Again, with these rooftops, you'll see, I'm there literally from dawn till dusk, and I might revisit somewhere a few days just to make sure I've got what I consider to be the best lighting on that picture. And that ended up being this picture. Well, I didn't put a foreground architectural feature, I more like did it like it was a hill going down and shoes at the top of the hill. This is the regimental veterinary officer, and but I like the idea of constructing something like that, where it's sort of not real, but it's sort of, you know, people will probably be looking for the hill, but it's just the way my mind works, the way I'm constructing things. And I knew I had this lovely portrait of this lady, and where she was lit completely from the right side, so completely from her back, and you can see the shadow of the horse extending, which matched in with all the shadow of light hitting the Tower of London and Tower Bridge and the rest of the City Hall and everything else behind it. But I love the you know, composition with the lovely historic architecture composed with the modernity of the lovely glassy buildings. So so that was lovely to construct, and that worked well. And often, as in with this sort of picture, and you will see when you know, I'll be shooting the back plate like this, and you can see the blue sky. I know the light on the building is how I want it, but the sky might not be. So I will then often replace skies, which again, I do an awful lot of time photographing turf and skies and architectural features all on its own, so I can use them. And I'll often do those over a seascape. So for instance, like this, because then I know I've got the sky. Again, I'll probably shoot a huge amount of sky and huge panoramas and heights and everything else, but I know I've got the sky right down to the horizon line. So if I put that within a cityscape or another environment, it would look more real because the sky will go right down to the horizon. So, so again, seascapes are often great for clouds. Here is, we're going to cut forward. I'm just going to quickly talk through a couple of the pictures. Wellington Arch, as I'm sure everybody in London is familiar with or who's visited. And the cavalry go through there. I think it's twice a day. I'm not quite sure, but I know it was definitely around 11 o'clock when I was looking at them there. And that's an interesting story because I was originally thinking I would go on the rooftop of Astley House, which is the Duke of Wellington's home. And I put in a request and got a lovely phone call from him, talking about the rooftop and the views, and whether it would be good fit, because I wanted all those connections with things. And in the end, we decided it wasn't going to be right, and I should try going up on Wellington Arch, which I did. Here's a view of a different kind of day, actually with them coming back. And I was on top of Wellington Arch thinking, well, this doesn't really work. It's just all I'm seeing is really a lot of traffic, and it's not quite what I want it to look like. But behind the cavalry there, you'll see the Lanesborough Hotel. And I thought, if I'm on top of that rooftop, I could get the arch and I could get Astley House, and I could make it with the cityscape behind and make it look, better image. And that was one of those things where I had to interject it quickly at this point that it took about 2.5 years to do all the background plates. Not only was it to do with things like weather, we had wet weather at the end of 2017, we had a drought where all the grass ended up brown, I think it was the end of 2018. And it's just permissions to get on rooftops, or the security, how it works. You put in emails or letters trying to get permissions and sort of insurances. And there's a whole lot of stuff you have to go through to get on top of a lot of landmark buildings and rooftops. This was one of the few times where I literally just walked into the Lanesborough and basically said to the manager, this is going to sound odd, but I need to get onto your rooftop to do a background plate because I'm doing some portraits with the Household Cavalry. I think I had a brochure on me of some of my previous work, so they seemed to believe me. They all spoke with their head of security for 10 minutes, came back and said, fine. And that was one of the first 3 times I went up on the roof there, just different times of day. Again, I wasn't quite sure. At this point in time, I'm not thinking, oh, that horse is going to be this particular setup. I'm just shooting as many options as I can, in as many views as I can, which I know I won't be able to start constructing the images until the very end of that process, because I don't want to start constructing something now and then realize actually it would have been a better fit with something else later on. So that's just the inevitability of time. Those things take. So here's a view, as you will see, from the top of the Lanesborough, which looks far better. Just looking at the arch there and the cityscape behind, you get more greenery with the trees, and it just sort of felt a little bit more settled than looking from the other views. Here's me. Again, you see the view of Astley House there, and you've got the cavalry again just coming in front there. Oh, it's a video. I always think it's when you have a bit of video, it just makes it seem more real than a picture. So this would have been early morning because the sun rises that way. I tell you what, doing all this stuff, the orientation, because I'm looking for the light which is will match in with a certain picture. And at this point, I'm thinking, well, I could do a picture I've got of the soldier mounted on his horse with the sunlight behind, and I had a couple of those. I wasn't sure, so I just was trying to do all times of day. Here you go. There you go. Sun at. What time's the sun at? Where will it be? Where will it match in with certain pictures I have? And I'd always have all the pictures there to reference, so that when I do the back plate, it looks cohesive enough that people would believe that could have been an actual thing. And this is the picture which I ended up constructing, which is the Corporal Major of the Blues and Royals with the Sovereign's Standard. And again, if you look in the background, you'll see I managed to capture the cavalry coming through the archway, and Aspey House to the left, and then a smattering of London buses, which all sort of add to the whole look of that picture.
Ripley, how many pictures did you end up with of the Household Cavalry that you have published?
I suppose I did about 20 setups altogether. So 20 different looks of soldiers and their horses and ceremonial, a wide range of ceremonial outfits, because we didn't just want it to be what most people's perception is of the Blues and Royals or the Lifeguards. We wanted to have a mixture, so it had a real variety to the look. So yeah, there's about 20, and I probably did about 20 separate back plates, which I honed down into the 12, the final 12, which I've done.
12, there are 12 in the exhibition.
There's 12 in the exhibition. Yeah.
And each one takes how many weeks to?
It was about 6 to 8 weeks on computer after doing the sort of 2 years of background plates, and then after the initial shoot. So the whole process to do the 12 pictures was about 4.5 years.
Are you doing any other work while this is going on?
I did 1 or 2. I think I did Pivotal and maybe even Cracksman. I'm not quite sure. In the earlier times, but I wasn't. Oh, I did some stuff for Cunningham Rebel Racing. I think I did. Cockney Rebel. So I did a few other commissions, but this was really my all-consuming focus at that point. And obviously, you know, this was, say, you know, 2017, 2018, 2019, doing the back plates and everything, really started to, and I also, throughout that period, I was doing all the cutouts of the horses and choosing all my top horses, which I'd done at Hyde Park Barracks. So that was an ongoing process I was doing. But then, you know, 2022, which was my sort of, in my mind, my processing time, obviously COVID kicked in. So which all sounds great, like, oh, brilliant, I was going to be on the computer anyway, but I think it was such an unsettled time at the beginning of that period, quite an anxious time. I found it very difficult to sit down on the computer and really focus as such, as I'm sure lots of people did when that all kicked off, you know, and it took me a good 4 months before I could really just sort of sit down and get back in the zone, so to speak. Because when I'm working on these large pictures, I'm often in a room with blackout blinds, and so I can see every tiny bit of shadow and little bit of detail within the image. And it's like a complex mathematical puzzle where you end up with files, 10 gigabytes. In size, and you're working on many layers to blend it all together in a cohesive way, and you can't just, it's not something you can leave and go back to a week later like a jigsaw puzzle or something. You have to actually just keep going, because it's in your mind so much of what you've done and what you might need to do as it moves forward. So you can't really
one of those practical questions. I worked in an advertising agency, and the art director had the idea of using an old plate camera to photograph a horse of Michael Stout's out in Newmarket Heath. How do you keep the horse still, or so that you can create the image that you're looking for?
That's just making sure it's all calm and people around you are very calm. And it's like really like any photographer who does confirmation shots or whatever for the stud books and stuff. It's you just want a calm time, a quiet time of day, calm handler. I'm usually very chilled out and relaxed about it. And let's just like say, right, let's try and have them stood like this, and obviously a very different thing with the cavalry to a thoroughbred, but it's yes, it's just a case of being calm and hopefully everything goes to plan. I mean, the thing with estimate on the picture I did of estimate, that was without stood in conformation, but without a head collar. And for that, at Polehampton Stud, where she was at the time, we constructed a large circular pen, and she would walk around with her lovely groom Stacey at the time, and they would be on the opposite sides. If you imagine that we're rotating around, I'm on my camera on a tripod trying to move it as she moves. Estimate was going around, and then the last minute when she was stood in a good position, I'd asked the girl to take the head collar off gently. I told her she could just rest her hand behind her, so she'd be as still as possible. I'd try and attract her attention a little bit. This is Estimate, to look maybe just in a certain way that I might have one other person off camera who is the usual thing, waving a green bag of crisps or something to try and get them to look somewhere, throwing up a bit of grass, and capture that image before the horse and went, oh, grass, food. So it's all these things, just little techniques and tricks to try and capture. And also, I'm not using a DSLR. I'm using what is primarily a large format studio camera, which is far less sympathetic to movement. It's used to being photographing high-end products in a controlled lighting setup. So I'm relying on the British weather and the horse being not too twitchy, so to speak. So there's all these things, you know.
Having worked on car accounts, I know how difficult it is to get the car to look as the manufacturer would like it to be.
Yeah.
To take on the challenge of a racehorse sounds quite daunting.
It's another thing. I think possibly my patience with the Wildcats when I was younger sort of paid off. So I'm usually just, I usually say to them, look, if it's not working, we'll just do it another day. Hopefully they'll allow me to come back but I don't, it's not a pressured situation.
As you told your story, you go from rock music through to cars, to Formula One and cars, and then to equestrian. When you started, you were catching images of moving objects in, rock concerts and so on. Is that a step that comes next with equestrian art?
Yeah, but I'm not doing horses which are racing or moving as such. A lot of my imagery.
I wondered whether it was another stage to come.
I would say that having photographed the cats when I was younger, and also, I was invited to places like Chester Zoo and stuff like that, behind the scenes and all their cat enclosures, because it's all connected with the whole conservation thing. That as I think as a teenager gave me lots of insight and experience in predicting behavior and movement, which I think that actually enabled me to take better pictures of people, because I would look at them on camera and it might not be something random. It might be when I'm directing someone in a studio, in the studio, but I could sort of anticipate how as a human they might respond to me saying something, and I would try and, do you know what I mean? It's quite weird. You're trying to anticipate how they're thinking, what they might do next. So so that sort of the cat sort of fed how I interact with people there, and then probably that experience of the people interacts with.
You did find the National Stud course useful in predicting behaviour or understanding behaviour of the horse?
Yeah, and I think just sort of just day to day, having horses around and working to a degree with horses quite regularly, I think you just can inevitably get a feeling of how the animal's thinking and what it might do next. It's trying to get into understanding their personality in a very quick way. And because obviously in the picture you want to bring out the personality of that horse, you just want a horse stood there with sort of a blank expression. You want it to have some engagement with the viewer who's looking at the portrait. So it's trying to create that charisma from what is quite a statuesque picture compared with say a racing picture, whatever. So yeah, no, it's everything.
Sticking with portraits for the time being.
Sorry?
You're sticking with portraits for the time being.
Yeah, I think I've sort of done the imagery I've liked to with the thoroughbreds, and I think with the cavalry, that's combined the human element with the equine element in a way which I liked, which wasn't a racing image, but was quite statuesque in that sort of look. And I don't know how to describe it really. It's just sort of I feel I've achieved a mixture of both, having done the Household Cavalry. So it's nice. It was a lovely project to do, however long it took, and I didn't expect it to take quite as long as it did, but it did. Would you like me to show you some more little background bits?
Yes, so we're coming towards the end of the hour, so I'm
Okay.
encouraging you to show the pictures.
Okay, right. I was going to just show some other background, just a few little bits. So you can see the roof lines I'm dealing with, all scaffolding on everything, and it's never as pretty as you imagine these places to be. That's a good example there. And that was the picture which I ended up with. She's the Corporal Major of the Lifeguards with the Sovereign Standard, looking down the Mall to Buckingham Palace, and then you've obviously got Nelson's Column and then National Gallery, Portrait Gallery, Canada House. Hey, me, prove I was there. I did it. So, and then that's me photographing from the rooftop of the Corinthia. Again, it's just a glass little, almost service way, really, for the. It's not a public space at all. And that shows you that sort of view. You can sort of see the sky there as well, and what I'm doing with there. And I ended up with this picture. This picture was a hugely complex picture to do, replacing the sky with all the wires with the Millennium Wheel and all the rest of it. So that was it. And things like this again, the the balustrade there didn't exist on the actual building, but it was in keeping with the style of the building and in that area. But that balustrade is actually from Holcombe Hall up in Norfolk. So again, and the paving was from near Tower Bridge. The sky, I think I photographed that from a seascape in the northeast of England. And it's just making it all coherent and together. That's a huge image, that as well, pixel-wise. People work in pixels. It's about 25,000 pixels by probably about 12,000 pixels. So it's a huge, huge image. Again, we can go to areas of St. Paul's. Again, rooftops. Again, they're never quite what you think they're going to be when you have these bonkers ideas, thinking all these rooftops are going to be all pristine and beautiful, and it's never quite how you imagined them to be. I've been on top of some lovely buildings, hugely ornate buildings, and you expect them to be this beautiful leaded rooftops, but it's all air conditioning and stainless steel bins and doors and ducting, and it's just a complete nightmare. So you end up having to construct lots of foreground elements. Here's another one which we started the program with. This is one, again, what looks like a simple picture in Greenwich, and all the foreground path and trees actually from Goodwood. That's another picture of the John Horse. On ground level, you'll be pleased to hear. that's one with the poppies, but it was one of those pictures with this horse and soldier. As soon as I photographed that image of the barracks, the horse just had this beautiful curved neck looking down, and the expression in its eyes had so much empathy and feeling. And the soldier, see, I can direct humans as the horses have to play ball. The soldier, he just had the perfect look as well. And as soon as I catch that image, I saw that I had that picture. I just thought, if that has to be poppies, it can't be a rooftop. It just has to be to do with poppies. So, but I sort of gave it a nod to the other feelings by having the distant London skyline. This the view was taken from Hampstead Heath.
Just before we started, you said the exhibition at the Horse Racing Museum had been extended.
Yes, it has. It was originally due to end at the end of July, and now it is running, thankfully, to the end of August before it heads back to London again. So it's it's absolutely fantastic news. National Horseracing Museum have been hugely kind in exhibiting it in the first place, but then to extend it, it's been just amazing. And I think the room it's in Gallery 6 there, couldn't be happier with the curation by Catherine Field, and the look of the space is it seems to fit the images perfectly. So
well, Kate and I are going to go straight back down and go and have a look at the exhibition again, and we'll see it in a completely different light when we go back down now, having listened to your talk.
Thank you very much.
It's just incredible how you construct them. We've been overwhelmed.
Yeah, astounded, awestruck. Hello.
Oh, keep talking. That sounds good.
Yeah, just
And we're, as I say,
completely boggled by this.
So
and how you do it. That.
I was going to go. I've got a whole thing on Photoshop. I was all going to show you all deconstructing the picture. We have to do another hour.
Well, that's fantastic. We'll invite you back, Ripley, if you want to come back. That would be fantastic.
No, can I just one last question, Ripley? Where is the exhibition in London, and when?
That at the minute is we're slightly between a few different places at the minute, and we're just trying to confirm logistics. So it's not something I can announce just at the minute, and it is also going to some private clubs as well. So it won't all be open to the public, but we're trying to, a bit like we did previously, in July, we had a private launch night for the cavalry at Sadler's Hall, but then it went to the Lanesborough Hotel for 3 days, which was open to the public. Then it went to Royal Ascot, where they built a beautiful exhibition space in the Royal Enclosure Gardens, which was, again, just amazing. Then it went back to the Lanesborough before coming to the National Horseracing Museum. So we had we've sort of been doing not necessarily just gallery spaces, even though I love it looking in the gallery space when I go to the National Horseracing Museum. It's it's been lovely to have them on large easels and lit at the Lanesborough. Again, a lovely different environments for people to see the work. So so we're looking at a mix in London of some more public spaces, but not gallery spaces, and then some private clubs again. So just a mix.
Ripley, can you make sure you tell us when the decisions have been made so that we can tell the members?
Absolutely.
Please.
I will pop it up on the website and bang you an email.
Right.
Please send me an email and we'll get a newsletter out to members.
Right. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon and for going through so much detail of how these pictures are constructed. You make it sound very easy and straightforward, but or they look straightforward, and yet
it didn't look very easy to me, Tim. It looked
again, with the cavalry, you just again, it's rather like the spotted horse picture, or even estimate, basically on the back lawn at Sandringham. I mean, we know that's not her normal environment, but it's just trying to think, or California Chrome in front of the Disney Hall, or doing
I call it alchemy.
It's just using it's just the imagination and not being conformed by the historical representations of horses or equines, and trying to do something which has a meaning. To me, the cavalry overlooking London as protectors seemed obvious.
That comes
to most other people it might seem completely out there. So but to me it's just the way my mind works. That's all I can say.
And it definitely proves that photography is sporting art, Ripley, definitely.
Oh, it's huge. When you do anything at large scale and fine detail, where people are going to, it's 2.5 meters wide by over 1 meter high, and people are going to go up to it at a gallery and just look at it and examine every element and see every fine detail. It's not something, and there's so much hand-drawn elements in it and so much considered composition. It's not dissimilar. When you look at the great artists like Munnings and everyone else, they would often do little drawings and basic versions of pictures and then composite, and then bring it out to a fuller full formed idea over time before finishing it. And I'm doing exactly the same thing. I just have to use the real world, and I have to capture the real world in order to start the process. That's to me, it's just another way of interpreting things, you know. But I know, at least, you know, my horse is the real horse, you know, and so it's, yeah, I don't know, it's just the way it is.
Well, it's like within Palace House, we've got Stubbs's sketch of the rubbing down house, which is what he used as his reference point. So it's the same reference point that you took of your picture of the rubbing down house.
Yeah, and ironically, looking back at that picture, even the tones I use in the grasses of the rubbing down house, that was literally got from the picture of Gimcrack in the in the Jockey Club rooms. So it's all those sort of tonalities, isn't it? I'm referencing. I don't really get inspired or reference photographers. I tend to be inspired by the greats of the equine portraiture world and their paintings, but also sculpture, which I absolutely adore. Some of the bronze sculptures, so I get a lot of inspiration outside my genre of work.
Yeah, I can see that. And when that picture came up on the screen, I'm going to go and have a look at the Stubbs again as well.
Yes, bless you.
Right, I think we should draw it to a close there, Ripley. We've had a lot of your time this afternoon, and I'm grateful for you spending the time with us. It's much appreciated.
Very kind.
Our next lecture is on the 21st of September at 2 o'clock, when we will have invited Sally Mitchell of the Museum of the Horse to talk to us about the work of the museum, and also that monumental work that she produced, the Dictionary of British Equestrian Artists. It's one of those most frequently consulted books that I have in my library, and it was written 1985, before the digital age and all the easy access to digital images and digital records. So I'm looking forward to Sally talking on the 21st of September. I wish everybody a good summer holiday, and thank you again, Ripley, for your time this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.